The silver spoon clinked against fine china as my son-in-law Randall Montgomery raised his cup in yet another self-congratulatory toast. "To the Montgomery legacy," he announced, his voice dripping with the same patronizing tone I'd endured for 15 years. Built on vision and business acumen that few outside our circle could truly appreciate. His eyes fixed on me. Eleanor Walsh, the 68-year-old grandmother he'd always dismissed as a quaint relic from a forgotten era. Little did he know that the family empire he so proudly toasted actually belonged to me and had for decades. Sometimes, the most satisfying revenge isn't served cold. It's served with a warm grandmotherly smile. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. The Montgomery summer estate sprawled across 3 manicured acres of Westchester County's most exclusive neighborhood. White columns, perfectly trimmed hedges, and security cameras disguised as decorative fixtures, all screaming old money and influence. I adjusted my modest cardigan despite the July heat as I slowly made my way up the grand staircase toward the main entrance, where my daughter Katherine waited. "Mom, you're late," Katherine whispered, kissing my cheek. Her eyes darted nervously toward the main hall where voices mingled with classical music. "Randall was asking where you were," I patted her hand. "The bus schedule doesn't revolve around your husband's timetable, dear." Katherine winced. "You know he offered to send a car. And you know I prefer my independence." I smiled, seeing the same quiet resilience in my daughter's eyes that had carried me through decades in the business world. She'd inherited that from me, though she didn't know just how much we had in common. The annual Montgomery Investment Group summer gathering was in full swing. Board members, politicians, and social climbers circulated through the mansion's great room, all vying for Randall's attention. He stood at the center, my son-in-law of 15 years, with his perfect silver-streaked hair and practiced smile. Beside him, his son, my grandson, Timothy, shifted uncomfortably in his tailored suit. "Eleanor, you've arrived at last," Randall's voice carried across the room. Conversations paused as heads turned in my direction. "We were just discussing the market forecast. Not that you would find that particularly interesting." Several of his associates chuckled. I'd grown accustomed to being the punchline of Randall's subtle jabs, the elderly mother-in-law who supposedly knew nothing about business or investments, who lived in a modest apartment and rode the public bus, who taught piano lessons at the community center to keep busy. "I find many things interesting, Randall," I replied mildly, accepting a glass of water from a passing server. "I'm sure you do," he said with manufactured warmth, placing a hand on Timothy's shoulder. "Timothy here has just finished his MBA. Top of his class at Wharton. Montgomery blood showing through, wouldn't you say?" Timothy looked uncomfortable. At 25, he had his mother's kind eyes and, I suspected, her distaste for his father's. Showmanship. "Congratulations, Timothy," I said sincerely, squeezing his arm. "Your grandmother would be proud." "Which reminds me," Randall said, his voice rising to command the room's attention again. "A toast to my late mother, Elizabeth Montgomery, whose financial wisdom laid the foundation for everything we have today." Glasses rose around the room. I sipped my water, thinking about Elizabeth Montgomery, a woman I'd never met but whose name had been weaponized against me for 15 years. According to family lore, she had been the investment genius, the visionary who transformed a small inheritance into the Montgomery Investment Group. The reality, buried in files in my private office, told a different story. Later that evening, as servers cleared dessert plates from the dining table, Randall launched into his favorite topic, himself, or more specifically, the Montgomery legacy. "My father was a good businessman," Randall explained to a wide-eyed young couple who'd recently signed with the firm. "But my mother, Elizabeth, she had the true gift. She could spot a winning investment a mile away." He swirled amber liquid in his crystal tumbler. When she took over the family portfolio in 1978, it was worth perhaps $5 million. By the time of her passing, she had grown it to over $100 million. I bit my tongue, thinking of the real numbers in the quarterly report sitting in my home safe. Elizabeth Montgomery hadn't grown anything. By 1978, Harrington Capital, my company, operating under a different name, had already acquired controlling interest in Montgomery Investments through a series of discrete purchases and proxy agreements. The firm had been hemorrhaging money under Thomas Montgomery's leadership, and most of their clients had been quietly shifting their portfolios to more stable management, namely, mine. "Eleanor, you're very quiet tonight," Randall's sister Diane observed from across the table. Her voice carried the same condescending tone as her brother's. "All this business talk must be terribly boring for you." "Not at all," I replied. "I find family histories fascinating." "Speaking of family history," Randall continued, barely acknowledging our exchange, "Timothy will be joining the executive team next month. The Montgomery tradition continues into the next generation." Katherine beamed with maternal pride, though I noticed her smile didn't quite reach her eyes. She'd confided in me last week that Timothy had wanted to work for an environmental investment fund instead. "Congratulations," I said to my grandson. "Will you be working with the Harrington Capital account?" Randall's expression flickered. Harrington Capital was the Montgomery Group's largest client by far, representing over 60% of their managed assets. The firm behind the account was famously private, communicating only through layers of representatives and legal teams. "That account is handled at the highest level," Randall said dismissively. "Perhaps in a few years, Timothy might sit in on some of those meetings." Timothy looked at me curiously. "Grandmother, how do you know about Harrington Capital?" Before I could answer, Randall laughed. "Your grandmother probably read the name in some magazine and remembered it. She has an excellent memory for trivia." He turned to me. "Isn't that right, Eleanor?" "Something like that," I murmured, hiding my smile behind my water glass. The following Tuesday, I unlocked the nondescript door of my private office in downtown Manhattan. To Katherine and Randall, I was teaching piano lessons at the community center, a volunteer position I genuinely enjoyed. What they didn't know was that twice a week I took the elevator to the 47th floor of a sleek office building, where Ellington Financial Advisors occupied the entire floor. "Good morning, Ms. Walsh," my executive assistant Michael greeted me. At 38, he'd been with me for 12 years and was one of the few people who knew both sides of my life. "The Tokyo markets closed strong, and the quarterly reports are on your desk for review." "Thank you, Michael." "Has there been any response from the Montgomery Group about the proposed adjustment to the fee structure?" Michael handed me a coffee. Black, 1 sugar, the way I'd taken it for 40 years. "Mr. Montgomery sent a rather strongly worded letter, suggesting that Harrington Capital should be grateful for their exceptional management of our assets, and that the current fee structure is more than fair given the returns." I couldn't help but laugh. If he only knew that those exceptional returns were the result of my instructions to his analysts, passed through our representatives. "The irony isn't lost on me," Michael said with a smile. "By the way, your 10:30 with the SEC commissioner has been moved to 11:15 and your granddaughter called. Lily wants to know if you're still on for the museum this weekend." I placed my handbag on the credenza behind my desk. Absolutely. Nothing gets in the way of time with my grandchildren. I glanced at the photographs on my desk. Katherine with her husband and their 2 children, Timothy and Lily, my son James with his wife and their 3 children in Colorado, and a faded photo of my late husband Robert, whose early passing had thrust me into the business world when I was just 33. "Will you tell them someday?" Michael asked, setting down a folder of documents requiring my signature. I sighed, looking out at the Manhattan skyline. That's the question I ask myself every day. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel It means a lot to us. Now, back to the story. Robert and I built this company together, and when he died, everyone assumed I'd sell my shares and live quietly off the proceeds. Even my own parents suggested it might be too much for a woman to handle alone. I smiled at the memory of proving them all wrong. By the time I met Randall, I'd learned the value of anonymity in this business. Men will tell you remarkable things when they think you're just someone's mother or grandmother. And Randall has told you plenty, Michael observed. More than he realizes, I agreed. The question is whether revealing the truth would hurt Katherine and the grandchildren. That's what I've struggled with all these years. Michael nodded in understanding. Speaking of revelations, the audit of Montgomery's management practices is complete. You were right about the irregularities. I turned from the window. How bad? Bad enough. They've been skimming from client accounts, small amounts from many accounts, adding up to millions over the past 5 years. Not from Harrington's accounts, though they wouldn't dare touch their largest client, but the other investors haven't been so fortunate. I felt a familiar anger rising. This was exactly why I'd maintained my secret position all these years. The investment world was filled with men like Randall, entitled, arrogant, and convinced of their own superiority. Men who believed rules existed for others, but not for them. Start the documentation process, I instructed, and schedule a meeting with our legal team for tomorrow. If he's stealing from clients, this ends now. 3 days later, I sat in Katherine's garden, watching Lily practice for her upcoming ballet recital on the lawn. At 14, she had her mother's grace and determination. "More tea, Mom?" Katherine asked, refilling my cup without waiting for an answer. "How are the piano lessons going?" "Wonderfully," I replied truthfully. "Mrs. Abernathy's grandson has quite a talent. Reminds me of you at that age." Katherine smiled nostalgically. "I sometimes wish I'd continued with music instead of—" She trailed off, looking toward the house where Randall could be seen pacing. On the patio, phone pressed to his ear. Instead of marrying into the illustrious Montgomery family? I finished for her, keeping my voice light. "Mom," she admonished gently. "That's not fair. Randall has given us a good life." I studied my daughter's face, noting the fine lines of strain around her eyes. "Has he? Or have you given him one?" Before Katherine could respond, Randall stalked across the lawn toward us, his face flushed with anger. "The Harrington account is requesting an audit," he announced without preamble. "An independent audit of all our management practices. This is unprecedented." Katherine looked confused. "Is that a problem? Surely everything is in order." Randall didn't answer her directly. Instead, he turned to me. "Did you say something to someone, Eleanor?" I raised my eyebrows in genuine surprise. "Me? Who would I talk to about your business affairs?" "I don't know," he said, his voice tight with suspicion. "But you mentioned Harrington Capital at dinner last week. It's an unusual coincidence." "Randall, that's absurd," Katherine interjected. "Mom wouldn't know anything about—" "Your mother has friends at that community center," Randall cut her off. "Who knows who she talks to? Maybe someone connected to Harrington. Maybe she repeated something she overheard without realizing the implications." I set down my teacup carefully. "Randall, I assure you I haven't been gossiping about your business with my piano students, most of whom are under the age of 12. He stared at me for a long moment, doubt clear in his eyes, before his attention was drawn back to his buzzing phone. "This isn't over," he muttered, storming back toward the house. Katherine watched him go, then turned to me with worried eyes. "He's under a lot of stress lately. The market's been unpredictable in this audit." "I've never seen him so concerned." I patted her hand reassuringly. "I'm sure everything will work out exactly as it should." And it would, though not in the way Randall Montgomery expected. After 15 years of watching from the shadows, of enduring his condescension and discovering his unethical practices, the time for truth was approaching. The audit was just the beginning. As I watched Lily twirl gracefully on the lawn, I thought about legacy. Not the false one Randall had constructed, but the real one I would leave for my grandchildren. Perhaps it was finally time for Eleanor Walsh to step out of the shadows and reclaim what had always been hers. The reckoning was coming, and Randall Montgomery was about to discover that the grandmother he'd dismissed all these years was actually the woman who owned his world. The first autumn leaves drifted across my view as I sat in my downtown office, reviewing the preliminary audit findings. Michael placed a steaming cup of tea beside the stack of documents. He knew I switched from coffee to tea in the afternoons, a habit from my early days building the company with Robert. "It's worse than we thought," he said quietly, taking the seat across from me. The forensic accountants found systematic diversion of funds from at least 15 client accounts over 7 years. Conservative estimate puts the total around $22 million. I removed my reading glasses, pinching the bridge of my nose. And the pattern? Always after major market gains. They skim a percentage from profits before reporting to clients, then write it off as administrative fees in internal documents. It's carefully hidden in the quarterly statements. Most clients wouldn't notice unless they did a line-by-line analysis. Randall's signature? Michael nodded. On every authorization, and his chief financial officer, Martin Wells. No sign that anyone else in senior management was involved. I thought of Timothy, about to start his career at the firm built on deception. We need to confirm that before we proceed. I don't want innocent people caught in the fallout. The full audit report will be ready next week. We'll have everything we need then. I turned toward the window, watching the city lights begin to flicker on as dusk approached. I've given Randall 15 years to prove me wrong, Michael. 15 years hoping he wasn't the man I suspected him to be. For Katherine's sake? And the grandchildren. Exposing him means exposing them to public scrutiny. The Montgomery name will be tarnished. With respect, Ms. Walsh, Michael said carefully, perhaps they should know what kind of legacy they're actually inheriting. I nodded slowly. You're right. And there's something else. I unlocked my desk drawer and withdrew a folder containing the most recent communication from Montgomery's legal team to Harrington Capital, my company. They're proposing a restructuring that would essentially give them more control over Harrington's assets while reducing their accountability. It's cleverly worded, but the intent is clear. Michael skimmed the document, his expression darkening. They're trying to position themselves to take over Harrington. A hostile move disguised as a strategic partnership enhancement. I closed the folder decisively. Randall has finally overplayed his hand. Sunday dinner at Katherine's home had been a tradition since her marriage to Randall. Usually, these gatherings maintained a veneer of family harmony, but tonight, tension crackled beneath the surface pleasantries. "Grandmother, did you really used to work in finance?" Lily asked as she passed me the bread basket. The question hung in the air. Randall's fork paused halfway to his mouth. "Where did you hear that?" Katherine asked her daughter. Lily shrugged. "I was researching career paths for my school project, and I found an old newspaper article about women in finance from the 80s. There was a picture of someone who looked exactly like grandmother, but the name was Eleanor Harrington, not Walsh. The silence that followed was deafening. Randall's eyes narrowed as he studied my face. "I'm sure it was just someone who resembled your grandmother," he said finally. "Eleanor Harrington was a well-known investment manager in the 80s. Your grandmother taught music at the community college before she retired." "Actually," I said calmly, spreading butter on my bread, "I did work in finance briefly after your grandfather died. It was a small administrative position at a local bank. Nothing glamorous." Timothy looked interested. "I never knew that, grandmother." "What made you leave the industry?" Before I could answer, Randall cut in. "Your grandmother realized her talents lay elsewhere. Finance requires a certain aptitude that not everyone possesses." His condescending smile didn't reach his eyes. "Some people are suited to the competitive world of investment management, others to more nurturing roles. Katherine shifted uncomfortably. Randall. It's fine, dear, I assured her, meeting Randall's gaze steadily. Your husband is right that finance requires specific aptitudes, integrity, for instance, and the ability to recognize when someone is cooking the books. The color drained from Randall's face. Excuse me? Just a general observation, I replied innocently. I've been reading about some unfortunate investment scandals in the news lately. So many families destroyed by financial misconduct. Mom has always followed financial news, Katherine interjected nervously. She's quite knowledgeable for a piano teacher? Randall finished, his voice tight. For someone who doesn't manage a multi-billion-dollar portfolio, Katherine corrected, giving her husband a pointed look. Lily, sensing the tension, changed the subject to her upcoming science fair project. The conversation moved on, but I noticed Randall watching me with new suspicion for the remainder of the evening. After dinner, as Katherine and the children cleared the table, Randall cornered me in the living room. That newspaper article Lily mentioned. Did you work for Eleanor Harrington? His tone was accusatory. I smoothed a wrinkle in my cardigan. I worked for many people over the years, Randall, most of whom treated their employees with more respect than you show your mother-in-law. His jaw tightened. You know something about the audit, don't you? Somehow you're connected to this. Perhaps I simply recognize a worried man when I see one, I replied quietly. Tell me, Randall, what exactly are you afraid the auditors will find? Before he could respond, Katherine entered the room. Mom, I've called you a car, unless you want to stay in the guest room tonight? No, dear, I prefer my own bed. Thank you. I gathered my purse and cardigan, nodding coolly to Randall. We'll continue our discussion another time. As the car pulled away from the Montgomery estate, I made a decision. It was time to accelerate my plans. Randall was growing suspicious, and if he started digging, he might take defensive actions that would harm more innocent clients. The following. Wednesday, I was surprised to receive a text from Timothy asking to meet privately at a cafe near Columbia University, where he occasionally guest lectured. Curious and a little concerned, I agreed. The cafe was busy with students hunched over laptops and faculty discussing academic politics. Timothy spotted me first, rising from a corner table and kissing my cheek before pulling out my chair. Thank you for coming, grandmother, he said, his expression serious. I wanted to speak with you away from the house. Is everything all right, Timothy? You seem troubled. He fidgeted with his coffee cup. I found something at the office. Something that doesn't make sense. He lowered his voice. Dad assigned me to review some historical client accounts, a training exercise, he said. But when I tried to access the complete records for certain major accounts, I was blocked. When I asked about it, he became angry, said I was overstepping. I kept my expression neutral. That does sound unusual. Then yesterday, I overheard Dad and Martin Wells discussing something called remediation protocols. They mentioned shredding documents and transferring funds before, and I quote, the Harrington situation escalates. Timothy leaned forward. Grandmother, I looked up Harrington. Capital. They're our biggest client, managing over 60% of our portfolio, but I can't find any public information about who owns the company. I studied my grandson's face, so much like his mother's, open and honest, with a strong moral compass that clearly troubled him now. What are you asking me, Timothy? I don't know, he admitted. Maybe if you still have connections in the financial world from when you worked in banking. Maybe you've heard something? I'm worried Dad might be involved in something unethical, and I don't know what to do. My heart ached for him, caught between loyalty to his father and his own integrity. I reached across the table and squeezed his hand. Timothy, sometimes doing the right thing means making difficult choices. Whatever you discover, remember that other people's actions don't define you. But if Dad is doing something wrong, and I know about it, his voice trailed off. Then you have to decide what kind of man you want to be. I said gently. Not what kind of Montgomery, but what kind of person. He nodded slowly. There's something else. That newspaper article Lily found? I looked it up. The woman in the photo, it is you, isn't it? Eleanor Walsh. For a moment I considered continuing the charade, but looking into my grandson's troubled eyes, I knew he deserved some measure of truth. Yes, I admitted. That was me, a long time ago. Were you successful? He asked. In finance? I smiled. I held my own in a man's world. Then why does Dad treat you like you don't understand business? Why have you let him dismiss you all these years? People see what they expect to see, Timothy. Your father expected to see a simple mother-in-law who would be impressed by his success. It was easier to let him believe that. But why? That's a conversation for another day, I said, glancing at my watch. One that should include your mother. But for now, I want you to do something for me. Be careful at the office. Don't confront your father, and don't access any more restricted files. Can you promise me that? He frowned. You know something, don't you? About what's happening with Harrington Capital and the audit? I know that things aren't always what they appear to be, I said carefully. And I know that in the coming weeks, much may change in your family. When it does, remember that your mother and I love you very much, and none of what happens is your responsibility to fix. Timothy studied my face for a long moment. You're not just my father's mother-in-law who teaches piano, are you, grandmother? I patted his hand and rose from the table. We all have our secrets, Timothy. Some are kept to protect others, not to deceive them. I'll see you at Sunday dinner. As I left the cafe, I texted Michael. Accelerate the timeline. Randall is destroying evidence, and I need to speak with Katherine privately before this goes any further. The pieces were falling into place faster than I'd anticipated. Soon, Randall Montgomery would discover that the elderly mother-in-law he'd dismissed for 15 years was actually the woman who controlled his fate. The woman whose company name he'd been invoking without ever knowing the connection. Eleanor Walsh was about to step out of the shadows, and the Montgomery legacy would never be the same. The rain came down in sheets as I waited in my car outside Katherine's favorite bookstore. She'd been surprised by my urgent request to meet somewhere private, away from both our homes, but had agreed without pressing for details. I watched her hurry from her car, fashionable raincoat pulled tight against the October chill. Inside, the bookstore cafe provided the perfect cover, busy enough that our conversation wouldn't be overheard, but secluded enough in our corner booth to speak freely. Katherine slid into the seat across from me, her expression concerned. Mom, what's going on? Your text sounded serious. I wrapped my hands around my teacup, gathering strength for the conversation I'd rehearsed countless times but never thought I'd actually have. Katherine, there's something I need to tell you about myself, about our family, and about Randall's business. Something I should have told you years ago. She stilled, sensing the weight of my words. You're not sick, are you? I shook my head. No, nothing like that. This is about who I really am. I took a deep breath. My name is Eleanor Walsh. Before I married your father, I was Eleanor Harrington. Katherine's brow furrowed. Harrington, like the investment firm? Lily mentioned finding an article. Yes. I founded Harrington Capital with your father in 1975. When he passed away, I continued building it into what it is today. One of the largest private investment firms in the country. Katherine stared at me, shock evident in her widened eyes. But you teach piano. You live in that small apartment. You take the bus. All by choice, I confirmed. After your father died, I discovered how quickly people's attitudes changed when they knew I controlled significant wealth. Men tried to court me for my money. Friends became sycophants. Even your brother James was treated differently at school. When word got out about our family's position, I reached for my purse and withdrew a small photo album I'd brought for this moment. When you were 12, I made a decision to separate my work life from our home life. I wanted you and James to have as normal a childhood as possible. Katherine flipped through the album, photographs she'd never seen before. Me at the opening of our Tokyo office, standing with financial luminaries at industry events, receiving awards that now sat in a vault rather than on my mantle. All these years, she whispered. Why didn't you tell me? At first, it was to protect you and James. Then, after you met Randall, it became complicated. Katherine's eyes snapped up to meet mine. What do you mean? When you brought Randall home that first time, he spent the evening explaining basic investment concepts to me, assuming I knew nothing about finance. He was so patronizing, yet you seemed smitten with him. I decided to look into his background before saying anything. And what did you find? Katherine asked, her voice suddenly tight. That the Montgomery Investment Group was already a client of a subsidiary of Harrington Capital. In fact, they managed several of our smaller portfolios. I paused, letting her absorb this. But more importantly, I discovered that Randall wasn't who he claimed to be. The Montgomery fortune he bragged about had largely disappeared 2 generations earlier. His father had rebuilt something modest, but nowhere near the legacy Randall projected to the world. Katherine sat back, stunned. So, when I married him, he was a mid-level investment manager with family connections but limited personal wealth, I finished gently. Which wouldn't have mattered if he loved you for yourself. But I watched how he operated, how he leveraged your marriage to climb. Social ladders, how he used the Montgomery name to attract clients. And you never said anything? Hurt flashed across her face. Would you have believed me? I asked quietly. You were 24, in love, and he'd convinced you your mother was a simple widow who knew nothing about his sophisticated world. Katherine was silent for a long moment, her fingers tracing the edge of a photograph showing me shaking hands with the Treasury Secretary in 1992. After you married, I continued, I made a decision. Rather than expose Randall and potentially destroy your marriage, I would watch and wait. I arranged for Harrington Capital to become Montgomery Investment Group's largest client, which gave me access to their financial operations. You were spying on my husband? Her voice was hollow. I was protecting my daughter, I corrected firmly. And as it turns out, my caution was warranted. Katherine, Randall has been embezzling from his clients for years. Millions of dollars. Her face paled. That's not possible. He wouldn't. I have proof, I said gently. Harrington Capital has been conducting an audit of Montgomery's management practices. The evidence is irrefutable. He's been skimming from client accounts, hiding the thefts behind manipulated returns and false fees. Katherine put her head in. Her hands. This can't be happening. I'm so sorry. I reached across the table to touch her arm. I've arranged for the audit results to be delivered to the firm's board of directors next week. Randall will likely face criminal charges. Criminal? Her head shot up. Mom, he's my children's father. I know. That's why I'm telling you now, before it becomes public. You need time to prepare yourself and the children. Tears welled in Katherine's eyes. Why didn't you stop him earlier? If you knew, I suspected, but I didn't have proof until recently. And I wanted to be absolutely certain before taking action. That would affect your family. I squeezed her hand. There's more. Timothy came to see me yesterday. He's found evidence of his father's misconduct, but doesn't fully understand what he's discovered. Katherine closed her eyes briefly. Timothy idolizes his father. He's also his mother's son, I reminded her, with a strong moral compass. He's troubled by what he's found. She was quiet for several minutes, processing everything. Finally, she looked up, her eyes red but clear. All these years, you let Randall belittle you, treat you like you were insignificant. How could you stand it? A small smile tugged at my lips. I'm a 68-year-old woman, Katherine. Do you know how invisible that makes me in Randall's world? How underestimated. It was surprisingly useful. But the humiliation was nothing compared to the satisfaction of watching him unknowingly report to me as his largest client. I sipped my tea. Besides, true power doesn't need to announce itself constantly. Your father taught me that. Katherine studied me with new eyes. I don't even know who you are anymore. I'm exactly who I've always been, I said softly. A mother who loves her children fiercely, a businesswoman who built something lasting, and a widow who honors your father's legacy by continuing the work we started together. The only difference is now you know all of me, not just the parts. Randall deemed important. What happens now? She asked, her voice steadier. That depends partly on you, I replied. The evidence goes to the board regardless. I won't allow Randall to continue stealing from people who trust him. But how we handle the family side of this, that's a conversation we need to have. Katherine took a deep breath. I need time to think. Of course, I nodded. But not too much time. Things will move quickly once the audit report is delivered. As we left the bookstore, Katherine paused under the awning, the rain still pouring around us. All those years ago, she said suddenly, when Randall and I got engaged, were you disappointed in me for choosing him? I considered my answer carefully. I was disappointed that he didn't seem to see the remarkable woman you truly are. That he valued the appearance of success over actual integrity. But I was never, ever disappointed in you. Katherine nodded, the ghost of a smile touching her lips. I have a lot to process, but thank you for telling me the truth. Finally, as I watched her drive away, I felt a weight lift from my shoulders and settle in my heart. The hardest revelation was behind me, but the most public one was still to come. The Montgomery Investment Group's headquarters occupied 3 floors of a glass tower in Midtown Manhattan. I'd visited many times over the years, always as Katherine's mother, never as Eleanor Harrington. Today, that would change. I dressed carefully in a tailored charcoal suit I kept in my office, not the cardigans and comfortable slacks Randall associated with his mother-in-law. My assistant Michael accompanied me, carrying a leather portfolio containing the full audit report. Are you ready for this? He asked as our car pulled up to the building. I've been ready for 15 years, I replied, smoothing my jacket. How do I look? Like the CEO you've always been, he said with an encouraging smile. The receptionist didn't recognize me at first, her practiced smile faltering when I gave my name. Eleanor Walsh to see Randall Montgomery. I believe I'm expected at the board. Meeting? Mrs. Walsh? Her confusion was evident. The meeting is limited to board members and— She's with me, came a familiar voice. I turned to see Timothy standing by the elevator bank, his expression a complex mixture of emotions. I'll escort my grandmother upstairs. In the elevator, Timothy studied me openly. Mom called me last night. She told me everything. And how do you feel about that everything? I asked carefully. He shook his head slowly. I don't know yet. Betrayed, I guess. By both you and Dad, in different ways. The elevator slowed as we approached the executive floor. But I do know that what he's done to his clients is wrong, and it has to stop. The boardroom fell silent as I entered. 12 people sat around the massive table with Randall at the head. His expression shifted from annoyance to confusion to alarm as he registered my presence and my attire. Eleanor? What are you doing here? This is a private board meeting. I know exactly what this is, Randall, I replied calmly, taking the empty seat directly opposite him. As Harrington Capital's representative, I have every right to be here. The room went completely still. Martin Wells, Randall's CFO, paled visibly. What are you talking about? Randall demanded, his voice rising. You're Katherine's mother. You teach piano. You have nothing to do with Harrington Capital. I opened my portfolio and withdrew a business card, sliding it across the polished table surface. Eleanor Walsh, founder and CEO of Harrington Capital Management. Your largest client and effectively the owner of 62% of the assets managed by Montgomery Investment Group. Disbelief rippled through the room. Board members exchanged glances, some confused, others seemingly putting pieces together. "This is absurd," Randall sputtered. "Some kind of joke." "I assure you, Mr. Montgomery, this is no joke," Michael stated, distributing copies of the audit report to each board member. "Mrs. Walsh has been the controlling interest behind Harrington Capital since its founding in 1975. The company currently manages assets in excess of $11 billion, of which approximately $4 billion are handled by Montgomery Investment Group under strict management protocols. Protocols that appear to have been violated systematically over the past 7 years," I added, my voice steady, "as detailed in the audit report before you." One of the board members, a sharp-eyed woman named Diane Levinson, flipped through the document rapidly. "These allegations are extremely serious, Mr. Montgomery. Client fund misappropriation, falsified returns, unauthorized fees." "This is a setup," Randall declared, slamming his hand on the table. "She's orchestrated this whole thing. She's always resented me, always been jealous of Katherine's life with me. Is that why you documented your embezzlement so thoroughly?" I asked mildly. "Because you anticipated I might one day reveal myself as the founder of Harrington Capital? I've never embezzled a penny," he shouted. The boardroom door opened and Katherine entered, composed but pale. "That's not true, Randall. I've seen the evidence myself." Randall's face contorted in disbelief. "Katherine? You're part of this conspiracy now?" "There's no conspiracy," she said quietly, taking a seat beside me. "Just the truth finally coming to light." Timothy moved to stand behind his mother. "I found documents in your private safe, Dad. Accounts in the Caymans, records of the client funds you diverted." Randall looked from his son to his wife to me, his composure crumbling. "You've turned my family against me," he hissed. "You did." "That yourself," I replied, "the moment you decided that other people's money was yours to take." The board chair, a distinguished man named Harrison Wells, cleared his throat. "Mr. Montgomery, in light of these allegations and the preliminary evidence presented, I am calling an immediate vote to suspend you from all duties pending a full investigation." "You can't do that. I built this company." Randall's voice rose to a shout. "Actually," I interjected, "your father built a modest investment firm. You inherited his client list and his reputation, which you've systematically exploited and degraded. The Montgomery legacy you're so proud of exists largely in your imagination." "And what would you know about legacy?" he sneered. "A piano teacher? A nobody who lucked into marrying well?" I smiled for the first time since entering the room. "I built Harrington Capital from nothing with my late husband. When he died unexpectedly, leaving me a widow with 2 young children, every man in the financial world expected me to sell my shares and disappear. Instead, I grew the company into one of the largest private investment firms in the country. That's my legacy, Randall. What's yours?" The board voted unanimously to suspend Randall pending investigation. As security was called to escort him from the building, he made one last desperate attempt. "This is a mistake," he told the board frantically. "Montgomery has managed Harrington's assets for 20 years. You can't just— Harrington hasn't simply been your client, Randall," I interrupted. "For the past 15 years, Harrington has effectively owned Montgomery Investment Group through a series of proxy holdings and management agreements. Agreements you signed without reading the fine print? Too arrogant to imagine that your mother-in-law could possibly be the Eleanor Harrington named in the documents." The color drained from his face as the full implications hit him. "That's not possible." "You've been working for me all along," I said simply. "Every quarterly report you condescendingly summarized for my benefit at family dinners was actually your report to me as your principal client. Every time you dismissed my simple understanding of finance, you were unwittingly dismissing your boss. As security officers appeared at the doorway, Randall looked at Katherine with desperate eyes. You can't let them do this to me. Think of the children, our reputation. I am thinking of our children, Katherine replied steadily. I'm teaching them that actions have consequences, even for people named Montgomery. I watched him being led away, no triumph in my heart, only a weary sense of justice long delayed. The board immediately convened an emergency session to address the crisis, with Katherine and Timothy invited to remain. In the hallway outside, I found a quiet moment alone with my daughter. Are you all right? I asked gently. She smoothed her hair, a gesture so reminiscent of her teenage years that it made my heart ache. No, she admitted, but I will be. We all will be. I never wanted it to end this way, I told her. I had hoped that he would be a better man than he is. She gave me a sad smile. So did I, Mom. So did I. The Montgomery legacy of deception was crumbling, but from its ruins, perhaps something authentic could finally emerge, built on truth, integrity, and the quiet strength that had sustained me all these years in the shadows. The Montgomery mansion felt different as I walked through its marble foyer a week after the board meeting revelation. The same gleaming surfaces, the same priceless art, but the air of pretension had dissipated, replaced by something more somber and authentic. Katherine met me in the study, where cardboard boxes were stacked against one wall. She looked tired, but resolute, dressed casually in jeans and a sweater, a far cry from the perfectly coordinated outfits Randall had always insisted upon for the lady of the house. The children are at school, she said, pouring us both coffee from a carafe on the desk. I thought it best to keep their routines as normal as possible. How are they handling everything? I asked, accepting the cup gratefully. Katherine sank into the leather chair behind the desk. Randall's chair, I noted, where he'd often held court during family gatherings. Lily is confused but resilient. She asks a lot of questions about what you really do, why you kept it secret. Katherine smiled faintly. I think she's actually impressed to discover her grandmother is a financial powerhouse. And Timothy? Her smile faded. Struggling, he idolized his father, built his entire career plan around following in those footsteps. Finding out that the legacy he thought he was inheriting was built on lies. She shook her head. He's angry at Randall. At me for not seeing the truth. He's taken a leave of absence from the firm. I nodded, understanding all too well the pain of shattered illusions. And you, Katherine? How are you holding up? She looked around the study, with its carefully cultivated trappings of old money and power. I'm selling the house, she announced. Most of it was for show anyway. The art Randall leased to impress clients, the antiques he couldn't actually afford but financed through the company. It was all part of the illusion. Where will you go? I found a townhouse in Brooklyn, more modest but actually ours. Or it will be, once the divorce is finalized. The word hung between us, though it wasn't unexpected. Randall faced multiple federal charges for securities fraud, wire fraud, and embezzlement. His legal team was negotiating a plea deal, but prison time was inevitable. Have you spoken with him? I asked carefully. Katherine nodded. Once, through the attorneys. He wanted me to use my influence with you to drop the charges. A bitter laugh escaped her. As if I had been keeping some secret hotline to the CEO of Harrington Capital all these years. He still doesn't understand that I was as deceived as everyone else. I'm sorry, I said softly. For all of it. Are you? Her eyes met mine, not accusatory, but searching. Would you have ever told me the truth if this hadn't happened? I considered the question honestly. I don't know. I told myself I was protecting you, but perhaps I was also protecting myself. It became easier to be the Eleanor that Randall underestimated than to challenge the life you'd built with him. Even at the cost of your own dignity? All those times he belittled you, dismissed you. Dignity isn't in how others treat you, Katherine. It's in knowing your own worth regardless. I sipped my coffee. Besides, watching Randall explain basic investment concepts to the woman who managed billions was sometimes rather amusing. A reluctant smile tugged at her lips. I'm trying to imagine his face when he realized. It was quite a picture, I confirmed. Though not one I take any pleasure in now. Katherine's expression sobered. The board has asked me to make a statement to the major clients, assuring them that the Montgomery firm is stable despite Randall's departure. Will you do it? I don't know, she admitted. I've spent 15 years as the perfect corporate wife, hosting dinners and charity events, but I've never been involved in the actual business. What could I possibly say to reassure people who've just learned their investment manager was stealing from them? I considered this. Perhaps the truth. That you were deceived too, but you're committed to making things right. And am I? Committed. To the firm, I mean. She looked out the window toward the manicured garden. I always thought of it as Randall's world, not mine. It could be yours, I suggested. You have an MBA gathering dust, a mind for strategy, and more integrity in your little finger than Randall had in his entire body. The Montgomery name still means something to many clients. Why not redefine what it stands for? Katherine looked surprised. You think I could run the company? With the right support, absolutely. Harrington Capital would maintain its investment position, of course, but with new management protocols. I smiled. Consider it a mother's vote of confidence. A mother who happens to control the majority of our assets, Katherine pointed out wryly. Those assets have always been intended for you and James eventually. This just accelerates the timeline somewhat. Katherine stood and walked to the window, tension visible in her shoulders. All these years, Mom. You were running $1 billion company while I was planning dinner parties and managing Randall's social calendar. I could have been learning from you, working with you. It's not too late, I said simply. Some lessons are better learned through experience than instruction, and you've had quite an education these past 2 weeks. She turned back to me. Determination, replacing the uncertainty in her eyes. I want to understand everything. The business, the investments, all of it. No more secrets, no more playing roles. If I'm going to salvage anything from this mess, I need to know exactly what I'm dealing with. I felt a surge of pride at her resilience. Then we'll start today. 3 days later, I sat across from Timothy at my downtown office. He'd requested the meeting, arriving in rumpled clothes with shadows under his eyes that spoke of sleepless nights. The view of Manhattan spread out behind me, a vista that had always given me perspective during difficult decisions. I appreciate you seeing me, grandmother. His formal tone conveyed the distance he still felt. You're my grandson, Timothy. My door is always open to you. He glanced around the elegant office with its subtle displays of power and achievement. This is where you've been all those Tuesday and Thursday afternoons? When you said you were teaching piano? I do teach piano, I clarified. Just not on those days. More secrets, he said, a note of bitterness creeping into his voice. Necessary compartmentalization, I corrected gently. I've spent decades building this company, protecting it from those who would exploit it, including, unfortunately, your father. Timothy flinched at the mention of Randall. He's negotiating a plea deal, 8 to 10 years possibly. I nodded. I've been informed. Did you push for the maximum sentence? The question carried an accusation. The prosecutors made their recommendations based on the extent of the fraud, I replied evenly. Over $22 million, Timothy. From people who trusted your father with their life savings, their retirement funds, their children's college accounts. He slumped in his chair. I know. I've been reviewing the files. Pain flashed across his face. Some of these people, I know them. They've been to our home for dinner. Dad would ask about their families, remember their children's names, all while he was stealing from them. I finished when he couldn't. Yes. How could he do it? How could I not have seen it? Because he was careful, and because you loved and respected him, I said. We often don't see the flaws in those we admire, especially when they work hard to conceal them. Timothy looked up, his eyes suddenly sharp. Like you did? Concealing who you really were all these years? I accepted the barb with a slight nod. A fair point. Though I would argue there's a difference between privacy and deception. I never lied about who I was. I simply didn't volunteer my full resume at family gatherings. Because you were investigating Dad? Initially, yes. I wanted to understand the man my daughter had married. Later, I maintained the separation between my personal and professional lives because it seemed simpler. The damage of revealing the truth seemed greater than the benefit. Timothy leaned forward. But you must have known, all those times Dad talked about the Montgomery legacy, about building the firm from nothing. You knew it was all exaggerated. Your father believed his own mythology, Timothy. The human capacity for self-deception is remarkable. I paused, choosing my next words carefully. Your grandfather, Randall's father, built a reputable if modest investment practice. When he died, Randall inherited the client relationships, but not the judgment or ethics that had established them. He wanted the trappings of success without the work of earning them. And I was going to inherit that same hollow legacy, Timothy said softly, following in footsteps that led nowhere. Not nowhere, I corrected. Just not where you thought. The question now is, where do your footsteps lead from here? Timothy stood abruptly and paced to the window, staring out at the city. I don't know. Everything I planned for is gone. The firm will never recover from this scandal. The Montgomery name is toxic in the industry now. Names can be changed. Firms can be rebuilt. But first you need to decide what you actually want, not what Randall programmed you to want. He turned back to me. What does that mean? It means when you first started college, you wanted to study environmental science, not finance. You talked about sustainable investment models and ethical fund management. But Randall insisted you follow the family tradition at Wharton instead. Surprise registered on his face. How did you know that? I never told anyone except Mom. Katherine and I do talk, you know, I smiled. And mothers notice when their children's dreams get redirected. Timothy returned to his seat, his expression thoughtful. I did have ideas about ethical investing, using financial leverage to reward companies doing real environmental good, not just greenwashing for PR points. A spark of the old enthusiasm lit his eyes momentarily before fading. But that's all academic now. No reputable firm would hire a Montgomery after this scandal. Perhaps not, I agreed. But what about Harrington Capital? He looked up sharply. What? We're launching a new division focused on environmental and social governance investing. The director position is open. It would require additional specialized training, of course, but the fundamental finance skills you already possess would be valuable. Timothy stared at me. You're offering me a job? After everything that's happened? I'm offering you an opportunity to find your own path, I corrected. One based on your values, not your father's illusions. The Montgomery name may be complicated, right now, but you're also a Walsh, and Walshes face their challenges head-on. Why would you do this? Suspicion lingered in his voice. After what Dad did to your company, to those clients. Because you're not your father, Timothy. You never were. I leaned forward, meeting his gaze directly. When you discovered evidence of wrongdoing, you didn't ignore it or cover it up. You sought the truth, even knowing it might hurt. That's the kind of integrity that can't be taught. It has to come from within. Timothy fell silent, absorbing my words. Finally, he asked, "Does Mom know about this offer?" "She suggested it," I revealed. "She's taking a more active role in the restructured Montgomery firm. We've been discussing potential synergies between our companies." "So you're working together now? After all these years of secrecy?" "Better late than never," I said with a small smile. "We both regret the lost time, but we're focused on moving forward. The question is, will you move forward with us?" Timothy didn't answer immediately, deliberation visible on his face. "I'd need to think about it." "Of course. Take all the time you need." I stood, signaling the close of our meeting. "Whatever you decide, remember that you're not defined by Randall's actions or his legacy. You have the chance to build something authentic, whether with us or elsewhere." As he reached the door, Timothy paused. "Grandmother, when did you know? That Dad was stealing, I mean." "I suspected for years," I admitted. "But I only had concrete proof in the last 6 months. And during all those family dinners, when he'd lecture you about finance, knowing what you knew, how did you stand it? Why didn't you expose him sooner?" I considered my answer carefully. Because every action has consequences beyond the immediate satisfaction it might bring. Exposing your father earlier would have protected some clients, yes, but it would have also devastated your mother when she wasn't prepared, disrupted your and Lily's lives dramatically, and perhaps driven Randall to more desperate actions. I waited until I had irrefutable evidence and until I believed your mother could handle the fallout. Was it worth it? The waiting, the pretending? I thought of Katherine's new determination, of Lily's discovery that women could wield quiet power, of Timothy himself standing on the cusp of authenticity after years of chasing his father's approval. "Time will tell," I said simply. But I believe good can emerge from even the most painful truths when faced with courage. You're showing that courage now. As Timothy left, I returned to the window, watching the afternoon light play across the city buildings. The Montgomery illusion had shattered, but from its fragments, something genuine was beginning to emerge. Not the legacy Randall had fabricated, but one built on truth, integrity, and the resilience that runs deeper than any family name. The press conference was Katherine's idea, a bold, preemptive move to control the narrative around Montgomery Investment Group's future. We stood together on the small stage at the firm's headquarters, Katherine at the podium, myself and Timothy flanking her in silent support. Camera flashes punctuated the tense atmosphere as Katherine addressed the assembled financial reporters and industry analysts. "As you know, Montgomery Investment Group has been through a profound crisis of leadership and ethics," she began, her voice steady despite the pressure. "My husband's actions betrayed not only his clients' trust, but the very principles that should guide our industry. For that, I am deeply sorry, though I stand before you not as Randall Montgomery's apologist, but as the architect of this firm's transformation." A murmur rippled through the crowd. Katherine had never been publicly involved in the firm's operations before. Effective immediately, Montgomery Investment Group will operate under new management and a new name, Integrity Partners. She outlined the restructuring plan we'd developed together, the enhanced oversight mechanisms, the client restitution program, the ethical investment protocols. Then came the moment we'd prepared for carefully. Katherine gestured toward me. "I'm also announcing a strategic partnership with Harrington Capital, under the leadership of its founder and CEO, Eleanor Walsh, my mother." The room erupted with questions as I stepped forward. For many in the financial community, this was their first glimpse of the notoriously private woman behind Harrington Capital. I kept my remarks brief, emphasizing the values that would guide our collaboration and the continuity that clients could expect. As the formal presentation concluded and reporters pressed forward with questions, I observed Timothy engaging thoughtfully, with a small group of industry analysts explaining the environmental investment initiative he would be heading. The shadow of his father's disgrace still lingered, But he stood straighter now, speaking with authentic passion rather than rehearsed confidence. Katherine fielded questions with remarkable poise, neither minimizing the severity of what had happened, nor allowing it to define the firm's future. In her, I saw echoes of myself at a similar turning point decades earlier, a woman determined to forge her own path in a world that underestimated her. As we left the podium, a veteran financial reporter approached me directly. "Mrs. Harrington, Walsh, why maintain your anonymity all these years? You built one of the most successful private investment firms in the country. Most people in your position would want recognition." I smiled. "In my experience, Mr. Chambers, true influence doesn't require constant acknowledgement. Sometimes being underestimated is the greatest advantage a woman in finance can have. And what about your son-in-law? Did he really never suspect who you were?" Randall saw what he expected to see. A simple mother-in-law who couldn't possibly understand his sophisticated world, I replied. "It's remarkable how blind arrogance can make people." "One last question," he persisted. "After everything that's happened, do you regret not revealing your identity sooner?" I glanced at Katherine, now confidently discussing restructuring details with the CEO of a partner firm, and at Timothy, animated as he outlined his vision for ethical investing to an attentive group. Regrets are luxuries for people with less interesting futures, Mr. Chambers. I prefer to focus on what comes next. The Montgomery illusion had served its purpose, revealing character, testing values, and ultimately clearing the way for something far more valuable. A legacy built on truth, not pretense, and family bonds strengthened by authenticity rather than weakened by facades. As Katherine often reminded me now, sometimes the most powerful statement isn't announcing who you are. It's simply being it, quietly and consistently, until the moment when the truth can finally speak for itself. 6 months passed quickly in the wake of the revelations. Spring had returned to New York, bringing with it a sense of renewal that seemed particularly fitting as I climbed the steps to my new office in the merged headquarters of Harrington Capital and Integrity Partners, formerly Montgomery Investment Group. The building featured a sleek atrium where sunlight poured through skylights, illuminating the modern space that now housed both companies. I had insisted on a first-floor office rather than the executive suite on the top floor. At 68, I had nothing left to prove about my position in the hierarchy. Besides, the ground-level space allowed me easy access to the courtyard garden I'd commissioned, where I often conducted informal meetings among the flowering cherry trees and thoughtfully placed benches. My assistant Michael knocked lightly on the open door, carrying a tray with tea. "The executive committee will be assembled in 10 minutes. Katherine asked if you needed anything before the quarterly review." "Just the latest performance figures for Timothy's environmental fund," I replied, accepting the tea gratefully. Michael smiled. "Already pulled them. Impressive growth for such a new initiative, up 18% in the first quarter. Timothy's strategy of backing mid-sized companies transitioning to sustainable practices is attracting significant attention. Send him a note from me. Let him know I'm pleased, but remind him not to get overconfident. Market corrections have a way of humbling even the best strategies." "As you've often reminded me," Michael said with a knowing look. He'd weathered many market cycles at my side. "Will the children be visiting this weekend as planned?" "Lily will," I confirmed. "She's bringing her science project for my review. Timothy may be delayed. He's meeting with potential partners in Boston." "And how is the new living arrangement working out? You and Katherine under one roof again after all these years?" I smiled, thinking of the Brooklyn brownstone Katherine and I now shared, with separate floors providing independence while allowing us to rebuild our relationship over morning coffee and evening conversations. Better than either of us expected. We're learning to be mother and daughter without the shadow of Randall's deceptions between us. And being closer to Lily has been a gift. And the piano lessons? Still teaching those? Every Monday and Wednesday, I confirmed. Some traditions are worth maintaining, especially now that they're choices rather than covers. The morning sun caught the framed photograph on my desk, not the old one of Robert alone, but a new family portrait taken at Christmas. Katherine and Timothy stood on either side of me, with Lily seated cross-legged on the floor before us. James and his family had flown in from Colorado for the occasion. The composition was natural, the smiles genuine, no staged perfection or underlying tension, just the simple authenticity we'd reclaimed. "Time for the meeting," Michael reminded me gently. I rose, straightening the jacket of my well-tailored suit. No more cardigans and sensible slacks for business functions, though. I still preferred them for comfort at home. The facade had served its purpose, but now I moved through the world as my complete self. Grandmother, CEO, mentor, and piano teacher. All facets of a life no longer compartmentalized. The executive boardroom buzzed with conversation as I entered. Katherine was already there, commanding attention in a way that would have been unimaginable a year ago. She'd found her voice as the public face of Integrity Partners, her natural diplomacy proving invaluable in rebuilding client relationships after Randall's disgrace. "We were just discussing the Warren account," she explained as I took my seat. "Mrs. Warren has requested a personal meeting with both of us." I raised an eyebrow. "Clarissa Warren? That's unexpected." Mrs. Warren was among the wealthiest clients affected by Randall's embezzlement. A widow in her 70s, she had entrusted Montgomery Investment Group with managing her late husband's considerable estate. When the fraud was exposed, she had been among the most vocal critics, threatening legal action beyond the criminal charges already filed. "She's agreed to come to the office this afternoon," Katherine continued. "I was hoping you might join us, given your history." "Of course," I agreed, though I'm curious what prompted this sudden willingness to engage. The meeting proceeded efficiently, covering quarterly performance across both firms, the successful integration of back-office functions, and the promising growth of several new initiatives, including Timothy's environmental fund. Throughout the presentation, I observed Katherine with pride. She had absorbed financial concepts with remarkable speed, combining her natural people skills with newly developed analytical abilities. Later that afternoon, Clarissa Warren arrived precisely on time, elegant in a tailored navy suit not unlike my own, her silver hair swept into a classic chignon. She carried herself with the confidence of a woman accustomed to wielding influence, her sharp eyes taking in every detail of the office as Katherine made introductions. "Mrs. Warren, I believe you know my mother, Eleanor Walsh, by reputation only," Clarissa replied, her gaze assessing me coolly. "The mystery woman behind Harrington Capital. I must say, your revelation caused quite a stir in certain circles." "I imagine it did," I acknowledged, though I suspect my identity was less shocking than the discovery of Randall's activities. "Indeed." Her tone was clipped as she took a seat across from us. "Which is why I'm here. I've spent 6 months reviewing every statement, every transaction, every investment decision made with my husband's money over the past decade." Katherine tensed beside me, clearly anticipating another confrontation about the fraud. We had established a restitution program for all affected clients, but no amount of repayment could fully restore the broken trust. "And what have you concluded?" I asked calmly. To my surprise, Clarissa's stern expression softened. "That I should have been paying closer attention all along." She reached into her leather portfolio and withdrew a folder. "My husband always handled our investments. When he died 7 years ago, I was lost." Randall Montgomery seemed so confident, so reassuring. He spoke the language of finance fluently, and I was grateful not to have to learn it myself. She slid the folder across the table to Katherine. "These are the withdrawal documents for my remaining funds with Integrity Partners." Katherine accepted the folder with a composed nod, though I knew the loss of such a significant account would sting. "We understand your decision, Mrs. Warren, and will facilitate the transfer to your new advisors immediately." "You misunderstand." Clarissa corrected her. I'm not moving my money to another firm. I'm taking direct control of it myself. My interest piqued. That's a significant undertaking at any age. Yes, well, I've had an unexpected inspiration. Her eyes met mine directly. A 68-year-old widow who built a financial empire while being consistently underestimated. It made me realize that at 73, I'm not too old to learn how the system works. I couldn't help but smile. Depends on the teacher. Precisely why I'm here. Clarissa straightened in her chair. Before I withdraw my funds, I want to understand exactly how they're currently invested. Not the superficial explanations Randall provided, but the actual mechanisms, risks, and rationales. I want to know what I'm walking away from. That would take considerable time, Katherine began. I have time, Clarissa interrupted. What I lack is knowledge, but I intend to remedy that. I studied her determined expression, recognizing a kindred spirit. You're not just here for an explanation. You want an education. Yes. She fixed her gaze on me. From someone who knows what it's like to be dismissed by men like Randall Montgomery, someone who turned that dismissal into an advantage. Katherine looked between us, understanding dawning in her eyes. You want my mother to mentor you? In a manner of speaking, Clarissa confirmed, though I had something more formal in mind. A program, perhaps, for women in my position, widows and divorcees suddenly responsible for significant assets but lacking the financial literacy to manage them effectively. I leaned forward, intrigued. You're proposing a client education initiative? I'm proposing a partnership, she clarified. I have connections to dozens of women in similar circumstances, all wary of traditional financial advisors after what happened with Montgomery. If Integrity Partners were to offer specialized education and transparent management services designed specifically for women like us, it would create a unique market position, Katherine finished, her strategic mind, immediately grasping the potential, and restore trust among a client demographic that's been particularly damaged by the scandal. Exactly. Clarissa nodded approvingly at Katherine. You understand the business implications. But for me, it's more personal than that. She turned, back to me. When the Montgomery fraud became public, I was humiliated. Not just because I'd lost money, but because I'd allowed myself to remain ignorant about something so important. I don't want other women to feel that way. The conviction in her voice resonated with me. How many times had I seen women of my generation defer financial decisions to husbands or male advisors? How many times had I been the only woman in the boardroom? I think you may be onto something significant, Mrs. Warren, I said thoughtfully. Something that extends beyond just rebuilding Integrity Partners. Please call me Clarissa, she replied with the first genuine smile since her arrival. If we're going to revolutionize how women relate to their wealth, we should be on a first-name-me basis, don't you think? By the time Clarissa left 2 hours later, the outlines of a new initiative had taken shape. The Eleanor program, named at Clarissa's insistence despite my protests, would offer financial education and specialized management, services for women transitioning into financial independence. Katherine would oversee its development within Integrity Partners, while I would design the educational curriculum drawing on my decades of experience. As we walked Clarissa to the elevator, she paused to deliver a parting thought. You know, Eleanor, the greatest damage Randall Montgomery inflicted wasn't financial. It was convincing women like me that finance was beyond our comprehension, that we needed men like him to protect us from our own ignorance. The most effective deceptions, I replied, are the ones that exploit our insecurities rather than our greed. Well, Clarissa said as the elevator doors opened, I'm done being insecure about money. And I suspect I'm not the only one. After she departed, Katherine turned to me with bright eyes. Mom, this could be transformative, not just for the business, but for actual lives. I squeezed her hand, heart full of pride at the leader she was becoming. The best legacies often emerge from the ashes of the worst deceptions. Sunday dinner had once been an ordeal at the Montgomery mansion, a carefully choreographed performance, where appearances mattered more than genuine connection. Now, gathered around the worn wooden table in Katherine's Brooklyn kitchen, the ritual had transformed into something authentic and nourishing. Lily set the table while Timothy tossed the salad. Katherine moved between stove and refrigerator, refusing my offers of help with good-natured independence. The brownstone, though less grand than the Westchester mansion, radiated warmth and life in a way the larger home never had. "Grandmother, did you review my science project?" Lily asked, placing water glasses at each setting. "I did," I confirmed. "Your analysis of urban microclimates is remarkably sophisticated for a ninth grader. Have you considered how it might connect to Timothy's work on sustainable urban development?" Timothy looked up from the salad bowl. "You know, Lily, if you collected data on energy usage in those same microclimate zones, we could potentially identify patterns that would interest some of our investment partners." "Really?" Lily's eyes widened. "You mean like actual companies might want my research?" With some refinement, he nodded. "Science doesn't exist in isolation from economics, something I wish I'd understood earlier in my education." Katherine brought the roast chicken to the table. "Speaking of education, Timothy has news about his fund." Timothy ducked his head modestly. "It's still preliminary, but Harvard Business School has asked me to present our ethical investment model to their finance students next month. Apparently, our performance metrics are challenging some conventional wisdom about returns on sustainable investments." "That's wonderful," I said sincerely. "Your grandfather would have been so proud." "Which one?" Lily asked innocently. "Grandfather Montgomery or Grandfather Walsh?" A momentary silence fell over the table at the mention of the Montgomery name. Randall remained a complicated subject, serving his prison sentence in a minimum security facility in Pennsylvania. He had made no attempt to contact Katherine since the divorce was finalized, though he occasionally wrote to Timothy, letters that my grandson read but rarely discussed. "Both in different ways," I answered carefully. "But particularly your grandfather Walsh. He believed that profit and principle could coexist in business. Timothy's work proves he was right." "Mom," Katherine said, changing the subject smoothly, "tell them about the Eleanor program launch." Over dinner, I outlined the initiative born from Clarissa Warren's visit, now expanded to include weekend workshops, one-on-one mentoring, and specialized investment vehicles designed for women managing wealth for the first time. "We've already received over 50 applications," I explained, ranging from recent widows to divorced professionals to young women who've inherited family assets. "It's brilliant positioning for the firm," Timothy observed, "building a reputation for education and transparency after what happened with Dad." "It's more than positioning," Katherine corrected gently. "It's about changing the relationship between women and financial power. Something I wish I'd understood years ago." "Would things have been different?" Lily asked. "If you had known about grandmother's company from the beginning?" Katherine exchanged a look with me across the table, a question we'd both contemplated, often over the past months. "I think," she said thoughtfully, "that we all might have found our authentic path sooner. But sometimes the longest routes teach us the most valuable lessons." As dinner concluded, and Timothy helped Lily with her calculus homework, Katherine and I stepped out onto the small terrace garden at the back of the brownstone. The spring evening was mild, city sounds creating a familiar backdrop to our conversation. "The Bach. Eleanor program launches next week," Katherine mused. "Are you nervous about being so publicly visible after all these years of anonymity?" I considered the question. "Not nervous exactly, but aware that visibility brings different challenges than invisibility did. Both have their uses. Like being underestimated by my ex-husband for 15 years? Her tone carried no bitterness now, only a wry understanding. That particular advantage has outlived its usefulness, I acknowledged. But the lessons it taught, about patience, observation, and the power of quiet competence, those remain valuable. Katherine leaned against the terrace railing. You know, when I was growing up, I always thought your life was so simple compared to what I imagined for myself. I wanted excitement, recognition, significance. And now? She smiled, gesturing toward the warm light spilling from the kitchen window, where Timothy and Lily could be seen laughing over textbooks. Now I understand that authenticity is more fulfilling than pretense, no matter how glamorous the facade. Inside the brownstone, the telephone rang. Lily's voice called through the open window. Mom, Aunt Claire is on the phone from London. She wants to know if we're still planning to visit this summer. Tell her absolutely yes, Katherine replied, and ask if she's considered our investment proposal for her foundation. I smiled at the seamless integration of family and business, a balance I had struggled to achieve in my early career. You make it look easy, I observed. I had a good teacher, Katherine replied, even when I didn't know I was being taught. As we turned to go inside, Katherine paused, her expression thoughtful. Mom, do you ever regret the years we lost, when I was so caught up in Randall's world that I couldn't see what was right in front of me? I considered my answer carefully. Regret is a luxury for people with less interesting futures, Katherine. I prefer to focus on what comes next. What came next was a family rebuilt on truth rather than illusion, a business transformed by transparency rather than deception, and a legacy defined not by names or appearances, but by the integrity that outlasts all pretense. The Montgomery fortune had been revealed as smoke and mirrors, but the Harrington Walsh legacy of resilience, authenticity, and quiet strength was proving far more valuable than any inheritance built on lies. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hits the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.